let's say someone slap you, you tell them stop. They slap you again, you like, all right, you better stop. Then they slap you again. Well, stop don't work.
I pledge my love to this.
When I was 8 years old, my dad was killed by 2 Minneapolis police officers.
What you see on TV, I mean, that's just a glimpse of what's not caught on tape.
You're listening to Mr. Radio, and I'm your host, Marshall. Today's guest is a Minneapolis-based writer and director whose works include Rideshare, Lucid Dreams, See You Soon, and the acclaimed feature film Black in Minneapolis. A recipient of the 2020 McKnight Media Artist Fellowship and a 2022 Catalyst Story Institute alum, he started his career in documentary filmmaking when he was 14 years old, with many of his stories revolving around social justice. At 15, he won the Screenlabs Challenge Audience Award at the Screenwriters Workshop. At 20, he worked on his first commercial project where he learned about the craft of lighting. Today, he continues to work as a creative director for his production company, Weco Films, and more recently as the author of a debut novel, N57. It is my pleasure to introduce David J. Buchanan to the show. Welcome to the show, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
First of all, it's a real honor to have you here, and I'd like to start with your early days. You started your career in documentary filmmaking at 14, and your work included many localized stories around social justice, or perhaps I should say injustice. Can you tell me more about that early experience in filmmaking?
Yeah, it really was like a vocational training spot where I got in actually earlier at 12. I was sort of learning film, and they hired me on at 14 because I had been doing stuff for a couple of years then, and it was just mostly around nonprofits in the neighborhood that just had different sort of missions, right? So it was like one was I believe teen homelessness, and then teen pregnancy and things like this. And so I just worked in that, at 14, pretty much all the way up until I think the last 7 years or so that that company that I was doing stuff with kind of disbanded. But that was mainly what it was, is just going around filming these nonprofits and getting interviews with people on the street, and kind of started off there and kind of opened my eyes to like what film could be, at least in the documentary space.
That's pretty impressive. 14, did they supply you with all of the equipment, or did you have to supply your own stuff?
It was mostly for the youth, like an after-school program. We got this thing in Minnesota called Step Up, and it's kind of like where people like teens or whatever who come out of school can like get a job, so it can kind of teach them job skills. And so I kind of I went through that, and that's when I'm just going to assume they saw some potential in me or whatever, and then they asked me if I could stay on during the school year, and I did. So I was always sort of working there after school. And yeah, they had it all set up, and they had sound and video and editing systems. So I, got to mess around with all that stuff. And then eventually I started buying my own equipment. So it's like I saw something there where I was like, oh, this is fun. This is great. I think I'm going to just make this a career of mine. And so then I, started investing in my own stuff. And eventually, I got enough production stuff now to make a movie basically on my own in a way.
So that led you to starting your company, Weco Films, is that correct?
Yeah, so I started that in 2015 because I had started getting some traction just with different people around town. Started to get known because I've been doing it for so long that I've gotten some clients that I did some mostly corporate work for. And then I branched off and started doing some more commercial work, and was like, okay, I want to, keep going with this. And then just having a production company makes everything a lot easier when it comes to like pitching different companies and like building out a team and hiring people and things like that.
So is your philosophy for Wico Films basically a commercially oriented, or are you also doing social justice with Wico Films?
If I had to brand it, it would be very much so in the world of like feature film, commercial, and documentary. It's not specifically the social justice, but as a Black person, it kind of seems like that's what people look to me for, right? They want something done in this way that's like, oh, can we get something that has either they'll say diversity on it, or they'll say a point of view from sort of, having like the background of, somebody who's in this urban area, and how that is. It's like people just automatically assume that. So it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to shy away from it, right? So I'm totally down to do stuff that's based around any sort of cultural thing that has to do with Blackness, but also it's not all about that. It's like, well, can we actually do any sort of commercials for like a Target or a Best Buy, or can we do something that's like for Adidas, any of the sort? But it's mainly focused around like feature filmmaking and commercials. So I've been talking with a lot of different people of how we might be able to get some indie films off the ground and what that might look like, and then I could partner with anybody on that. And so it's just like, because movie making is, you need so many different resources to come together to get these things done, that I would hate to just box myself into one niche thing. And I don't know if that would necessarily even work for all the things that I write about. Like, it definitely doesn't work for N57. You know what I mean? It's not even close. So I don't really box myself in that much, but of course it's, on my website, it's a minority owned production company, and, I'm happy to talk to anybody about, whatever it is.
Well, when you say it doesn't work for N57, I am going to ask you about that later. But right now, I'd like to ask you, speaking of your urban background, in 2018, you wrote and directed an acclaimed feature, Black in Minneapolis. I think it was originally titled Black.
Yeah, exactly.
And starred Toussaint Morrison and Joseph Grant. He played Joseph Grant, the main character, and Jeff Briley was Derek, a good friend, and Malik Chessie. He played Joseph's brother Cole. For those who haven't seen the movie, it revolves around Joseph Grant, who's a Black man who begins an uprising after the police kill his brother Cole during a routine traffic stop. This movie was filmed, interestingly, 2 years before George Floyd was murdered by the Minneapolis police in 2020. And in an interview with the Minnesota Daily, you called the film almost a premonition. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think, so, okay, so I'll say this. It was Philando Castile got murdered on Facebook Live, and I watched that, and so I was like, I didn't know what to think, but I knew that I needed to do something and use my tool set, and so my tool set is film as a filmmaker. So I wrote something, and I wanted to make this film, made the movie, and in the film, there's a pretty evident sort of, we got to collect our resources and then, stop this police brutality from happening. And so I think it's, to me at least, obvious that something like the George Floyd would have happened, where there would have been thousands of people protesting, and, places would have burned down, and, there would have been a bunch of things like this going on, because eventually people are going to get fed up. It's no different than if somebody's starving you and they keep giving you bits of food, one day you're going to, bite their hand, right? As soon as their hand comes in to give you those bits of food, they're going to bite their hand because you're starving to death. It's no different than that. So, I mean, I just saw it as like a future premonition, because how could it be anything other than that in my mind? And, it's, the issue is, it hasn't changed all that dramatically. We have seen people getting charged, like, there are cops getting charged now. So there are some changes, which is a good thing, but it's definitely not where it needs to be. And it just happened to be the culmination of, COVID, people being in their houses, and George Floyd getting a knee on his neck and then crying for his mother, that I think really got people out of their seats to go do something. So I think it was like, the perfect storm for that. When that did happen, my film was self-distributed under the title Black, and then it got picked up for distribution because us being local to Minneapolis, making a film about Minneapolis and police brutality in Minneapolis, they just saw that it was a good reason to pick it up and spread it out worldwide distribution.
I can't imagine what went through your mind when you were watching a live stream of someone being murdered on the internet. That definitely would have been something that I wouldn't have been able to handle, but evidently you were able to turn it into a impetus for making a film. In your film, it starts out with a quote, which I have used when talking to some of the people that I talk to in terms of social justice. And it's a quote from the Washington Post that says, and I'm quoting, "There are 200 million white people in America. White people make up 62% of the U.S. population, but only about 49% of those who are killed by police officers. Black people account for 24% of those fatally shot and killed by the police, despite being only 13% of the U.S. population. That means Black Americans are 2.5 times more likely than white Americans to be shot and killed by police." Do you think enough of the American population is aware of this? And if not, do you see a role as an artist to make them more aware?
The first part of your question, I would say, no, I don't think they're aware of that. I think people like to live sort of in naivety, which is, a part of me believes that's okay, because they say ignorance is bliss in a way. And I think if you knew everything about the injustices that were happening just in the world, it might drive you crazy, right? Like, there's so many different things happening just right now today as we're speaking. And like, I mean, I don't know how political you are, but I mean, look at this political climate. I mean, it's crazy. I don't think I would ever have witnessed some of the things that I've been seeing, like, not to get too political, but I just think the last thing that was super wild to me was having a meeting with the military. Like, the president has a meeting with the military, and some of the conversation there was a little bit like odd, and but if you don't know about it, then you're gonna, obviously, it can't really bug you, you know what I mean? So I think the awareness of it isn't there. I don't know how much I want somebody who's innocent to be non-innocent, because I don't really want to. I'm not one of those people who wants to put my problems on you. I mean, specifically, this film was made as sort of, it was made for Black people, if I'm being honest about it. It was like, this is for Black people to recognize what's happening to us, so we should know our history and the things that come along with it, more than it is for, like, white people to know, hey, these are things that are happening to Black folks. It wasn't really about that, and I wasn't really making the movie in that way. Now, I'm totally fine if whoever watches it, right? Because that's great. You gain more knowledge that way. I guess I just don't, in my mind, it's like, I think if you want to learn something, there's plenty to learn, and I do think it is important to, know about your neighbors, just so you guys can have some sort of understanding of each other. But it's not my duty to instill this knowledge upon anybody. I don't think that.
It won the Breakthrough Achievement Award for your lead actor, Toussaint Morrison, and as well as a festival award for him. And for the listeners who haven't seen the movie, I thought perhaps I could play the trailer, because the trailer seems to highlight all of the important elements of your movie. So let's listen to the trailer.
Let's say someone slap you, you tell them stop. They slap you again, you like, all right, you better stop. Then they slap you again. Well, stop don't work.
I pledge my love to this.
When I was 8 years old, my dad was killed by 2 Minneapolis police officers.
What you see on TV, I mean, that's just a glimpse of what's not caught on tape.
The United States of America. Oh.
It's all law and order, right? Law and order where a citizen can shoot a young black man for wearing a hoodie because he feels threatened for his life. America has killed hundreds of thousands of young black lives. Whoa! Hey, come on! Stay where you are. My hands are going to need you. Hey, man, hey! I said stay still. Don't put the gun away. Don't make We have to stop them.
Stop them how?
By any means necessary.
What is you, Malcolm X now?
Have you ever been to a Black Lives Matter protest?
I was actually just looking to talk to myself.
You want to use Black Lives Matter as an army against white people?
Are you advocating for terrorism?
You can't be broken by devils in blue suits.
You all I got. You're like a brother to me.
What you doing, young fellow?
Yeah, I got hope. Yeah, I'm gonna make it. Yeah, I got a dream. You bet I'm gonna chase it.
Throughout the film, you included interviews with witnesses of various forms of racial injustice. Were those actors or actual participants, actual interviews with people who had experienced these things?
Those are real folks. So I wanted it to be, you know, with obviously the narrative fiction of it, I wanted there to be narrative fact. And so we got some folks who were willing to actually tell their stories on camera. And I always had that idea included in the film. I even wrote the script specifically with questions in the script itself that I would be asking the interviewees in the film.
You also have very early in the film a very powerful scene where there's a traffic stop. Let me just play that. It involves the police and Cole, who is in the back seat, and Derek, who is the friend. He's driving the car, and Cole's brother Joseph is in the passenger seat. Let's take a listen to this scene.
You in the back seat. What's your hand doing? Show me your hand.
What?
What's in your hand?
My phone.
What's in your other hand?
It's not in my hand.
You know how fast you were going?
The speed limit?
Sure you were. Where you boys heading?
Monty's place.
You in a hurry to get there?
No, not really.
You know why I pulled you over?
No, because I wasn't speeding.
Your license plate light is out.
In the daylight?
And?
You can see my license plate out in the daylight.
What did I say? You calling me a liar?
I'm not calling you anything.
License and insurance.
Got nothing better else to do.
What's that?
Nothing.
Show me your hands. Reach for it, slow. I need you to show me the insurance.
You can't take it out of the envelope?
Ed.
What has he done to disrespect you in any way?
What'd you say?
Cole.
I'm saying, what has he done to make you curse all crazy?
Give me your ID, kid.
I ain't no kid.
Give me your ID.
What?
Give me your ID!
Are you on something?
You want to go downtown?
You can't just
do what he says, Cole.
IDs, everybody. Now.
Just curious, what experiences or how did you go about creating that scene?
I just have been pulled over a lot. I mean, I don't. Yeah, that was kind of the easiest thing to write, honestly, in the whole process. Just because it's like you can also. There's so many different traffic stops. Like you could just kind of look up on YouTube and just see how cops be interacting with people, and it's just. Some of that was just from my own personal, getting stopped, pulled over by cops, saying different things that don't make any sense whatsoever. And then it's just, you try to get out of there as quickly as possible. I think the funniest thing is like, last time I got pulled over, I'm like, let me just try not saying anything at all. And that seemed to get me on my way a lot faster than even talking at all. But it's just, yeah, I don't know. That one seemed like pretty fluid, that particular scene.
I want to play one last track from your movie because it's going to be a segue into the next part of my questions for you. In this track, we have Joseph, the brother of the late Cole, and he's explaining the importance of books to his close friend, Derek.
When I was 12, my uncle told me that the secrets are in the writing and that I should read as much and whenever that I could. I wasn't that into it because most that I was forced to read in school was garbage. It was old dead white men literature, Iliad and the Odyssey, Mice and Men, Founding Fathers. But I did all right. I did okay. But it wasn't until I was 20, Cole was laughing at me. And he said, "That's funny. That's how they keep black men stupid. They know we don't read, so they put all the secrets in the writing." I guess I needed to hear it twice, especially from Cole. But decided to pick up The Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And that changed my life. From that day forward, I was able to see things clearer, understand why politicians do what they do, why people succeed, why people fail. I read so many books. I took the GED, passed with the perfect score, read some books on finances, saved 17G, put it away, read Chicken Soup for the Soul, pulled a beautiful black queen, calling my girlfriend now. Just saying a book can do a lot if you put it into practice.
A book can do a lot if you put it into practice. How did you make the leap from writing and producing films to your latest novel, N57?
Yeah, so I had this idea of N57 for a while. I wrote it back in, I think it was 2013, 2014, somewhere around there. And I'd done a few different things with it. So I got some, pages drawn from a comic, did some motion stuff around it, got some music made, and I'm like, well, I really want folks to read this story. Like, I think I like the story. I think other people might like it too. And so I just started writing a book. It took me, I probably started writing a couple of years ago, I think. I don't have the exact date, but I really just wanted to write a book so people could read the story. That was my leap.
Was your original intent for this to be a film?
Yes. I wrote it came from a screenplay, and it's funny because I wrote it to get shot very cheaply. It actually was not completely different, but the Badlands was still the same, almost exactly the same. There was like a small little part in there that changed to what it is now. But in the original script, this guy went to Silver Bay, Minnesota, so he could submerge himself and split into two people. And then the story would continue of like, what is it like to have one life, but good and evil comes out of that one life, meaning like the yin and yang, and how can that work? Like, how can two people, like if you have a brother and you both grow up in the same household, how one could be so vastly different than the other. And that's what I wanted to explore with the film. And so I wrote it very cheaply to make, but I wasn't able to get that off the ground. I did get it optioned, for a production from a production company out in LA, but still wasn't able to get that particular piece off the ground. So then I rewrote it to be a little bit more mainstream than that, or what I consider to be a more mainstream. And so then I wrote a full backstory of where these humanoids sort of came from, and then it transformed to what it is now. And that was still the screenplay that I just kept, working on that for a while. And then I just put it away until eventually had the idea of like, well, I could just make this a novel or, a short novel. And then I just started working on it, which was, one of the hardest things I've ever done. Is writing a book is extremely difficult.
Do you find it harder than writing a screenplay?
Yeah, I would say so. At least, and that might be because I just have way more experience writing scripts. So I started writing almost around the same time as I started filming. I wrote my first script, I believe it was between 12 and 14. I can't remember, but it was short, like maybe 20 pages or something like that. I actually wrote it on paper by hand, so I hand wrote it, and then I started typing it up. But I've been writing for a very long time. Like I said, N57 as a script was written in 2013, 2014, but I had wrote 3 scripts previous to then, all feature film length, so 90 to 120 pages. And actually, N57, I couldn't turn off my brain. Like, I wrote way too much. I was pushing 200, 300 pages of script, and it's like, wow, this is too much. So I had to really kind of refocus and make it a more sort of contained story as much as I could, because eventually, nobody's going to make a 300-page screenplay. That's insane. That's a mini series or something.
Well, you're known as a visceral storyteller, and I have to agree with that. I spent the summer reading N57, and you start the novel in the Badlands, and having myself visited the Badlands, I thought your description of the area was spot on. How were you able to capture the landscape in words?
I was there at a young age, so I visited the Badlands with my dad when I was around 16 or so, and I kind of remembered it from there, but I just looked at a lot of pictures and videos and wiki pages and things like that to really get a vivid sort of description in my mind, and then sort of transpose that into the script itself. And I just wanted to make it sort of otherworldly. So, because in the Badlands can be that way. Like when you see these sort of cliffs and bluffs, and it can get really crazy, right? Like even down in places like Utah, when you look at that and how the oceans just eroded those rocks, it almost feels like you're on another planet. And so the Badlands has that same sort of look to it. And I don't remember it well when I went there. I do remember that we were skipping across these, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a cliff, but it was kind of like that. But there was these narrow gaps that if you fell, you might find yourself in that book or that movie 127 Hours, where you're like trapped between like a ravine or something. And we were jumping between these like gaps to get to a better height to see out into like this, to the landscape. So I do remember that. It just looks really odd. It's a really odd looking place. And sometimes it can look super dead, and then other times it looks like there's life around.
Well, you definitely did an excellent job of capturing it in words. And we're in the Badlands, and N57 wakes up, and he has no name and only fragments of his past. Why did you choose to strip N57 of his identity?
Initially, I did it that way just because it would be easier to film, because if you give somebody a past, then it's almost like we gotta figure out what that is, and then make this backstory sort of come to life on screen in some type of way. So that's why I initially did it. I kept it in there the second rewrite around because I thought it would be actually interesting to go back to a past state and see how he sort of, became what he was in this facility and how he lost his memories. And it just makes for a more interesting story, I think, when you sort of pulling this identity out of this person, because it has that sort of feeling about like, who am I and what is my identity and what do I want to become in that way.
As I mentioned earlier, you're known for your visceral storytelling, and to illustrate this, I asked you to read a selection from your book, and in this particular selection, we find N57 in the Badlands. Let's take a listen.
In a frenzied state, his own blood painting the ground beneath him, he fervently scraped at his flesh with his fingernails, ripping off his face and hair in a twisted display of self-destruction. However, his face and hair rematerialized within a blink of an eye, achieving nothing but healed wounds. Then, in a moment of madness, he plunged his hands into his own chest, shattering his rib cage and rendering himself in two. He believed that this was the only escape from the torment of hatred and pain, the only path to transcendence from sorrow that had racked him so deeply. He healed again, then ripped out his mandible. His unique physiology allowed him to perform such a grotesque act. Although his mind couldn't fully comprehend it, his body's molecular geometry continuously reconstructed itself, but he remained resolute in his desire to die, driven by a desperate need for salvation as he tore into himself again and again. The thick odor of iron and cloying blood misted the air, reminiscent of fabric being torn, but with a more visceral, organic quality. The sickening crunching of his tissues being separated and ruptured, a wet, muddy sound, like someone tearing apart a piece of raw meat with their bare hands. It seemed to go on forever, a never-ending nightmare that crescendoed 100-fold. With each brutal thrust into his body, he felt as if he was unlocking memories he had long forgotten. A rib snapped and he saw his brother's face. A clavicle cracked and he felt a father's touch. A skull smashed and he heard a handler's voice, a friend's bark, an enemy's order. He was a puzzle of pain, unlocking his memories with blood and bone. The act of self-mutilation was a strange kind of therapy, carving away the parts of himself that caused him pain, while synchronously piecing together the fragments of his fractured mind. The memory still swirled in a hazy mist, but the pieces were slowly falling into place. He could almost feel the wounds on his psyche healing with each slice of his flesh. Even with this progress of regained memories, he couldn't bring himself to stop. He continued his frenzied self-attack, never pausing or taking a breath. And then, like a carcass thrown to the rocks, 2 dismembered pieces of his body thudded to the ground. The blood did not remain stagnant for long. It began to boil and churn, transforming into an agitated vortex of crimson, unifying and coagulating together to form 2 large puddles. And as if emerging from a blasphemous baptism, 2 naked figures ascended from the turbulent bloodbath, the bodies drenched in what had once been N57.
Definitely visceral writing, but in your chapter titled Dreams, it's a little bit different there. The imagery from that section, that stayed with me for a long time after finishing the book. In particular, you have a sequence where N57 is viewing the Great Seal of the United States at the bottom of the pool, and it's followed by the appearance of the book This Is War, which is seared and damaged in the water. And that created a powerful and haunting set of visual illustrations for me, because as a former member of the Navy, I had to study a war manual, and the imagery of a damaged war manual combined with the militarized figures in your book that we're now seeing roaming our streets really resonated deeply with my personal experiences. What experiences did you have that you were able to bring up these visual illustrations?
That's a great question. I don't have a great answer for that, just because I don't have any experience directly with any sort of military anything. I really was thinking about it in a way of like, we are a country that is, at least from my perspective, I think what makes this economy work is mostly in our military, and the reason why it sort of is why it's like, oh, we don't audit the military, we don't do these things. It's because of, I think, what we do, and what we do is usually we have the most weapons. If I'm not mistaken, I think we have the highest tech weapons, we have the most weapons, and we keep investing into them. And so it just makes sense to me that the military would invest in sort of these humanoids to help them defeat other, enemies if it ever came down to that. And so why is that so important that we have these destructive weapons to do these things? And it's because, in the book, General Raven is talking about it's a duty to America. And that's what it's sort of based around in that way. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. Yeah, I don't know too much more than that. And that's kind of where I was thinking about the imagery around, is like duty versus like freedom versus like what the cost of all this could be, and life, and sort of these, and what they were like, at least in that part of in the book, in those chapters. It's like, one of them has this sense of duty and the sense of directive, and the other one is like, yeah, but I want to live and be free.
I think you just gave an excellent definition of the military-industrial complex. N57 is haunted by the ghost of a brother with golden eyes. Can you elaborate on this?
So in the backstory, what you would get in sort of the middle chapters of the book is like, he has this brother that he really cares for, and the only thing that can really get him off his directive is his brother's, just anything to deal with his brother's will. Basically, he wants to be in a good place with him, because he looks at him as sort of this, I don't know, thing that makes him human in a way. And his brother is always striving to be free, and specifically to have a mission to look at the ocean. That's one of the first things he wants to do when they get out of this facility. And he has no desire to go fight a war. He doesn't see the meaning behind fighting these wars. And so he's haunted by his brother because of things that happened in their past, and without giving too much away, that this just undeniable connection that he has with him.
You have N57 breaking and splitting into two different forces. Was it always your intention to have this character split, or did this idea develop over the course of your writing the book?
Yeah, that was always in there. So that was the first idea from day one of just writing the script, was like, I want this person to split in two, because I want to explore an identity where people live where one person lives the same life, and they can split into two people and then have two completely different personalities. I don't know if it's a 1-to-1 ratio with the book in that way, because it feels like they sort of do live two different lives after the split. But that was always the core idea. And I have never seen that before. And I just thought, honestly, it was just a cool-ass idea. I'm like, I'm going to write that.
Good idea. Glad you went on it. You mentioned humanoid earlier, and N57 is a genetically engineered humanoid. Did you want to raise any ethical or philosophical questions about genetic engineering?
Well, I didn't know that it was real. This is like, at least when I was writing this, it was always sort of sci-fi to me that this could be a thing. But now it doesn't feel like sci-fi anymore, because there's people doing it, meaning like, if you pay enough money, you can get a boy or a girl, right? Like if you're your woman is pregnant and you want to specifically have a boy, you can make that for sure be a boy. Also, they were doing tests to see if they could change the genes to make somebody come out a certain way, and they said it worked. I haven't done a ton of research on this, but they said they can get rid of diseases in a baby. So if you're like genetically, you might have cancer in your family, they could try to get rid of that, and then they could make the child like have blonde hair and blue eyes and 6 feet tall, things like this. And I just saw an article maybe a week ago where the Chinese are having babies incubated in robots and giving birth. As much as it might be sci-fi in the book, I don't know how long the sci-fi is going to last, because I think that some of this stuff that I wrote is actually possible. Now, it does go into some realms of like genetic splicing with plants and animals and things. I don't know if they can do all that, but yeah, I didn't necessarily have any ideas around it other than like, oh, that's a cool sort of sci-fi thing to add in the book. In fact, if I'm being honest, when I initially wrote the script, I was thinking this person might be an alien. That's what I was initially thinking. And then at some point during the writing, I'm like, wouldn't it be cooler if he was a soldier for the U.S.? And so then I went down that route. And I don't think I reached the genetic engineering until maybe like a second draft or so to sort of figure out how that might work. So it kind of just morphed and formed a little bit. It was more organic with that aspect of the character.
In your movie, you refer to a lot of authors, different books. What authors have influenced your writing?
Well, the biggest one is probably Ted Chiang. Ted Chiang, I haven't read any like long novels from him, but his short stories I really dig. There's one, and I can't remember the title. I think it's the absence. What is it? Hell is the absence of God, or something about that. But that one I really enjoyed. And then, of course, Your Story, which Arrival is based on. And then he wrote one about the Babylon Towers, which was great. So I really like him. He's probably my top. And then I read a couple of Stephen King joints that Stephen King's just such a great writer. It's almost, and he writes everything. So it's like, you could pick up almost any one of his books and just like enjoy it. And I just recently, it's funny, I'm going back to like my childhood readings of Lord of the Flies. I just finished that one, and I was like, oh, this is actually pretty good. The problem is when you read in school, you don't really like it. At least I didn't. So I was like, I don't really like this reading thing. And so I really didn't actually start reading until later in my life, at around 22 or something. And that's when I started reading. And then I was reading mostly non-fiction books. So, which is, the part that you did from the film, the excerpt of Joe's monologue talking about the secrets are in the writing. That's kind of like pulled from my life in a way, because it's like that's what I had to happen to me before I started reading. And then I was reading Malcolm Gladwell books and like Robert Greene books and different books on finances and relationships and this and that. And it was like, oh, wow, this is actually really fantastic. And more sort of the fiction stuff came even later than that. But I don't really have a super influential style from any author. I think it might actually help my writing even more if I did have something like that. I feel like most of my stuff is just influenced by the screenwriting that I've done, and sort of how do I translate that into prose, because that was one of the hardest parts. So I think anybody who reads a book might even notice that a little bit, that it's like, oh, this kind of reads, I don't know if awkward is the right word, but it's like, if you read a script and you read my novel, it might be like, okay, this kind of, you can see how this guy is like really trying to adapt it to a novel, which is funny because most of the time it's the other way around, right? You take a book and you want to adapt that to a screenplay. You don't really do the opposite of that.
When I started putting my questions together for you, one of my questions was, why turn a screenplay into a novel? And you just answered that question for me. Any other plans for N57? You're going to have a sequel or any related stories planned?
I don't have a sequel in my head for it, at least. I mean, if there's a demand for it, I would consider it for sure. I got a lot of material for it, but I want to, the next step, it would be great if I could either make a comic from it, and so I can turn that comic into a motion comic, and so it can be something visual that people can look at that moves. But obviously the ultimate goal is like to get it funded and make a movie from it, because that's the idea that I had in the first place, and that's really the ultimate goal, is what I want to do.
For our listeners who want to either watch your films or read your book, where should they be searching?
Yeah, so you can pick up N57 anywhere you get your favorite books: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, iTunes, anything like that. In terms of my films, you can go to my website, and that can bring you to a link to any of my films. I believe Black in Minneapolis is up on Amazon, iTunes, Vimeo, and different places. I think it might be on Peacock as well, where you can stream it. But my website is a great place to start.
And what is your website? I'll put a link into it.
It is davidjbuchanan.com. If y'all need the spelling on Buchanan, because I know some people, it's like,
go ahead.
BUCHANAN.com.
Very good. David J. Buchanan, I'm so happy that you were able to take the time to speak with me, and I hope to hear from you again real soon.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
You've been listening to Mr. Radio, and I'm your host, Marshall. This program was written and produced by Marshall. Our theme music was played by Ululation. Mr. Radio is available wherever you get your podcasts, including iTunes and Spotify. Subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. And don't forget to tune in next week for another episode of Mr. Radio.